Happy Friday. It's really, really wonderful to see you here in the NSE. Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 844th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege today of being your MC for a conversation featuring Henry Threadgill and David Hershkovits. We're thrilled to welcome poet Julie Patton here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter, and here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we're speaking from. And now to introduce today's guest and host, composer and multi-instrumentalist Henry Threadgill is widely recognized as one of the most original and innovative voices in contemporary music. He has acclaimed releases from his bands Air, X75, the Henry Threadgill Sextett, Very Circus, Make a Move, Zooid, and Ensemble Double Up. He was named a jazz master by the National Endowment for the Arts in 2021. And David Hershkovits is a writer and editor and publisher who began his career as a journalist at The Courier, a New Orleans weekly. Moving back to New York in the late 70s, he joined the staff of Soho Weekly News. He founded Paper Magazine in 1984 and has co-edited several books and has also written for publications including GQ and Vanity Fair, among others. He also hosted the Light Culture podcast, focusing on culture and cannabis. I'm so thrilled to have you both in conversation today on the new social environment. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, David.
Hey, thank you. Thank you, Brooklyn Rail. Thank you, Fong, for helping arrange all of this. It's a great honor for me to be host and an opportunity to talk with Henry in this format. Uninterrupted 1 hour. So the occasion that brings us together here is a publication of this book, autobiography. I'll hold up here and I'll read it. Easily Slip into Another World, A Life in Music by Henry Threadgill and Brent Hayes Edwards. This is a wonderful book for anyone interested in anything really in American history and culture, music, just the evolution of creative individual from, like we all start out little boys and girls and then, end up somewhere very different sometimes. So Henry, I know you're not like one to believe in the importance of titles as far as bringing meaning to your work, because you're famous for your titles like, for example, Keep Right On Playing Through the River Over the Water, or Salute to the Enema Bandit, which are names of some of your compositions. So Easily Slip into Another World, do you feel that's has the same kind of value as those, or do you have more meaning into this one?
No, I think it has the same kind of values. Yeah,
So you don't really feel like it doesn't mean anything particular?
Not in particular.
All right. Because you in general, and your views about music are that one shouldn't bring meaning to it, that you should just sort of get it from the music.
Yes.
And today, in the art world particularly, there's always this question of storytelling, yes. The story behind the artwork that brings to it meaning.
Yeah.
How do you respond to that? Do you relate to that at all?
Well, that seems to be the prevailing way to present art these days, to tell the story and the story behind the story and the meaning. I don't see that these things have much value because the viewer or the audience, they come to a work of art and you really have to view it on your own terms. You can't really subscribe to what someone has told you about it, all the background material. It really doesn't help you, you know. You're in a world of your own when you face listening or viewing a work of art. You're all by yourself, and nothing that somebody else tells you can really help. You know? Matter of fact, I think it does more to distract from the experience that you might have, you know, because it creates expectations. And when someone explains something, that's just one way of explaining. It's one thing I learned in school. There's a lot of ways to explain things. It's not one way to explain anything. You can explain things 3 or 4 or 5 different ways, you know. So my advice is to never touch explanations regarding art. Just go in for the experience.
You have, you know, for example, like a work like Guernica, Picasso's Guernica, which so much, you know, meaning is into that with regard to the war and history. Is that, you feel that's contradicts what you're saying, or is it, doesn't matter?
Contradict, you know. Yeah, it might have something to do with the war, and that's not the only painting like that. I can think of the other painter right now. But again, these things are, again, subjective, you know. They don't really, because you see something historically don't mean that that's the only way you can look at it historically. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That might be important, then it might not be important. See, a work of art is an elusive thing in itself. The more you try to tie it down, the more it gets away from it. It gets mercurial, you know. And we've just fallen into this fashion in the art world of explaining everything and saying what things mean and what my intentions are. Well, whatever your intentions are, not what my intent, what they might not work for me or anybody else, you know. So I don't see the necessity of sharing this kind of information. But this is a democracy. People should do whatever they want to do.
Is it still a democracy? Let me check. What time is it? I think we're doing okay. But that said, I'd like to explore some of the context of your life, of your story, as you talk about it. You know, beginning in Chicago,
right.
At an early age. Reading your book, one of the images that struck me was you standing in front of Howling Wolf at Maxwell Market when you were like 4 or 5 years old, mesmerized and basically lost in his music for the day, right? Your family were looking for you. They didn't know where you were, and that's where they found you.
And so what did you want me to, in relation to?
I want to know, you know, I want to talk about like how, you know, you talked about school and influence and how that came to become an important part of your life, important enough for you to bring it up in your book.
Yeah, you know, and I'm going to deviate and come back to that. You know, I'm reading another book on the history of Chicago right now about the life of Jelly Roll Morton, and it's so informative. Chicago has got this history, incredible history. See, the Great Migration is what brought the Southerners, Southern Black people, and Southerner white people also to Chicago. They brought people from the South to Chicago because Chicago was like 42nd Street. What I mean by that is you go to 42nd Street to change trains to go anywhere in New York. They all stop on 42nd Street, somewhere on the east side or the west side, you're going to get a connection. Well, to go anywhere in the United States, you had to go to Chicago. So anyway, so before the blues people got, the people that were fans of the blues, which were Southerners, it was the people from New Orleans that came to Chicago at the turn of the century. That was Jelly Roll Morton, and later on, people King Oliver and Louis Armstrong, they came right at the beginning of the 20s. And so that migration, at the same time, the South, the blues came to Chicago. And this is what struck me. So this is the let's say 1920, 25. So now 1949, 1950, I'm standing in front of Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf on Maxwell Street, you know. And it was just for me as a kid, it was overpowering. I had heard very powerful music live, but this Howlin' Wolf just took me away. It was like, you know, he was like the Pied Piper. He could just walk me off into the lake. I could have walked right out. If he went into the lake, I'd have went right after him.
And, you know, and staying with Chicago for a minute, because when the musicians and, you know, when the migration came from the South at that point, you know, for example, Muddy Waters being, you know, one of the first that I'm aware of that, you know, became a recording artist and famous for that. You know, they plugged in, so they went electric. And my understanding is that, you know, having this rural blues sound, that when it went north to Chicago and all of the energy and everything that was going on in a big city made the music change into this other form that we're more familiar with today.
Yeah, it became electric later, probably in the, I'm not exactly sure, but I think around the late 50s, maybe, it became electric, you know, because that's when the electric instruments really started to take off, you know, but it stayed basically acoustic music in the beginning, you know, and it was being played in small venues, so you didn't really need electric instruments so much, you know. The bigger the venues got, the more the necessity to have electric instruments became a need, you know, as we got into larger halls and concert spaces, you know. But for the longest, I mean, that first record by Muddy Waters called Electric Mud.
That was the one that kind of brought it into the psychedelic rock and roll era.
That's right. Because
that was a part of Chess Records, which was another big Chicago institution. Yeah. Did you have any run-in with those people from Chess Records in those days?
No, I knew that I had met one of the Chess brothers, and I did some recording, I think, at Chess, but like I was in studio band, you know, came in to play on some rhythm and blues tracks, and that was my only real contact. I never had like a recording contract with any of the Chess brothers, just recording in that studio once or twice, you know.
But how did you feel when you heard like Chuck Berry, or when sort of the sound was moving from blues to more like a rock, what we know as rock and roll today?
Yeah, well, Chuck Berry and Little Richard. You have to credit Little Richard with that, along with Chuck Berry, because Little Richard was right there. I don't know who got the home plate first. It could have been a tie, but I know Little Richard was right there, you know. But yeah, all of a sudden it was like there was this other energy and this other branch, music that was branching off from the blues, you know. And that was like I said, Chuck Berry and Little Richard had it. They had moved the goalpost someplace else, you know. And
where were you in your musical evolution at that point?
Oh, I was just interested in blues and jazz at that point, you know. But you know, like, you know, the Beatles were under contract in Chicago. You know that, right?
Oh, right. No.
Oh, yeah, they were under contract to the Chess brothers. The Chess brothers owned the Beatles.
Really? No, this is
yes, they did. Yes, they did. They had the Beatles first. When it came to America, that's who had them. And they made the mistake of selling them.
Yeah.
No, I know they regretted that, you know. And then the Stones came to Chicago, remember?
That's right.
After the Beatles.
Well, they actually recorded at the Chess Record Studios, right?
That's right, yeah. Because of the blues and the blues stretching out into the music of Chuck Berry and Little Richard. I knew Little Richard's mother quite. She lived down the street from me when I was a kid. You know, she had a pool room. I used to go there as a kid. She was always telling us when little Richard might show up, but we would never be there when he came to visit her, you know.
There's a good documentary now. You could check I don't remember the title, but there's a new documentary about little Richard.
Mm-hmm.
That's very interesting. So in terms of your family background, your father ran a gambling house.
He ran a lot, a number of different, at different times, you know, he worked, running gambling casinos for the mob.
Which one?
Well, I hope I'm not offending anybody, but the Italian mob.
Okay.
That's who was, that when we think of Chicago, you got to remember when Capone came, he came there and he had to fight the Irish, and basically the Irish he had to fight to get rid of the Irish, you know. And so the Italians had it, the Sicilians had it, you know. And my grandfather had worked for them, had worked at, he transported liquor from all over the country, all the way to Canada. He used to drink illegal liquor working for Al Capone. He made enough money to bring my grandmother and my father to Chicago. That's how they got there, because my grandfather, Henry, made enough money working for Al Capone that he could move the family to Chicago. And that's how my father had this connection with Al Capone and that whole group. And so that's how my father ended up working for the corporation.
And you never wanted to go into the family business?
No.
But your mom had a more genteel background.
Yeah. My father loved me. My father was into music, highly into music, really into music, you know. And he knew everybody. He knew Count Basie and everybody, you know. And he had an incredible record collection, you know. He knew all about music, you know. That's just that was just his lifestyle, you know, which was the lifestyle in America anyway at that time. So many people, I mean, you know.
Was it like really a Black families, you know, more, you know, always respecting music, you know, having music as part of the home life, piano, records? Just seems like it's part of the, you know, it's part of the history and the legacy.
I think that it would vary from, that would vary depending on the families, you know, and it might have something to do with economics and it might not. See, the thing about what you're exposed to, what we were exposed to in America, not just Chicago, was radio. And radio did not have the guidelines that they have now. You heard all kinds of music, and we heard plays and everything on the radio. You know, everybody would run to the radio at certain times of the day to hear certain programs, to hear different music. And this music crossed all borders, especially in Chicago. I grew up, I listened to as much Serbian music as I listened to Polish music, as I listened to country and Western hillbilly music, as I did Black music. Because that's what played on the radio all day long, you know.
Well,
so
in those days, it was like the race music, right? Wasn't that?
Those were race records, what they call race records. When they went to exploit making records of just Black artists. And that started with these two brothers. What were their names? These were two brothers that like managed and to get control of General Morton's music. Oh, I don't know. Their name started with an M. There were two brothers that came up from Southern Illinois that started this whole race record business. But they made a lot of money with that, you know, because the race records was basically it started out with a lot of New Orleans inflected music that was from New Orleans. And later on, it expanded into other aspects, but mostly New Orleans in the beginning.
And you had a piano growing up, and you started just fooling around on the piano on your own?
Yeah, well, yes, I did, but I didn't even know it was a piano in the house until I heard Boogie Woogie on the radio. This was a long hallway, and they were in the house. We could go to this room, that room, but in that hallway, there was a single light, and so you couldn't see everything that was in the hallway. That's where the piano was. But when I heard this music on the radio, this was Albert Ammons and me, Lux Lewis. They would play Boogie Woogie every day when I was about 3. And when I heard that, all of a sudden I found a piano, because I said, I've got to be able to do this. I got to be able to play this. So I would go and sit at the piano all day until that music would come on. It didn't matter. I'd get up in the morning, and after I had something to eat and wash up, I'd go sit at the piano with the radio on, waiting. And when it would come on, then I would try to do it. And so it took, day after day after day. And you got to remember, a kid that's 3 years old, you can imagine what size my hands were. Trying and think about what was going on with Boogie Woogie piano playing. And so I had to reduce it down to a minimal way of playing Boogie Woogie, And that's what got me started in music, physically, I would say physically. But my mother had already had me into music, taking me to hear all these concerts and everything. She took me to hear all of the great Louis Armstrong, Duke Ellington, Jimmy Longstreet, Erskine Hawkins, everybody, Basie, Sugar Child Robinson, everybody. She took me to see all of them on a regular, almost a weekly basis.
Yeah, so talking about time and place, Chicago was really an important place to be in those days, right? If you
everything came through. That whole crowd, Louis Armstrong, Lil Armstrong, Jelly Roll Morton. I didn't even know that Benny Goodman was born in Chicago. And Benny Goodman learned to play up under Jelly Roll Morton by sitting in front of him all the time, studying him and studying his band. Everything was coming out. See, Chicago, I think it was called the Union Stockyards. Why all of the trains came into Chicago? Because all of the train lines went all over the country to do what? To feed America. Because all of the meat products came from where? Chicago. That's where the stockyards were. I remember when I first got in kindergarten, first grade, kindergarten, Monday morning, they would have to close the windows to the school. In the spring and summer, they had to close the windows because the smell of blood. The whole city smelled of blood once they started butchering the animals. And then on the influence of the Catholic Church prevailed for them not to slaughter animals on Fridays. And consequently, in the public school system, they served no meat on Fridays. You could only get fish at school. So that was one day that we didn't have to breathe the smell of blood, and neither could you see any kind of meat product in the school system on Friday. So Chicago is an extremely interesting place in terms of these cultures. And when you go over and look at all the greatest architects' work is in Chicago. There's no other city in America that has what Chicago has that represents the world of architecture and sculpture. And why is that? It's because Chicago's policy is started under Richard Daley. They tear Chicago down and rebuild it constantly. New York looks the same. They didn't start building anything here until Giuliani came along and started tearing down and building up. But basically, it looks the same. The building that I live in here on 10th Street, all these places, you can go back and see pictures of it in Google and go back to 1932, 1925 and see what the street looked like. Every place I live in Chicago, it all disappeared. My kids ask me, say, when you live so-and-so, it's in a picture. I said, yeah, if I don't have a photograph, you'll never see it otherwise, because if you go there, you won't see it. They tear it down. Mayor Daley made money with concrete. The Democratic Party made all that money through Daley with concrete, the tearing down and building up of large architectural sculptured pieces and housing and buildings of all sorts.
Yes. Sorry, go ahead.
So that's so Chicago is this very interesting place in terms of what goes on in terms of that world of that aspect of the arts of sculpture and architecture. But and to show you the other thing about the importance, after Richard Daley, every president of the United States had to come to Chicago. If you wanted to become the president of the United States, you had to come to Chicago and see the mayor of Chicago, to see the mayor of Chicago to become the president of the United States, Republican or Democrat, because he could deliver the vote that he could deliver. There was a big scandal when John F. Kennedy.
That's right.
He really didn't want. He was really upset about coming, because you had to come and sit up on the platform and sit behind Mayor Daley, because Mayor Daley was considered the king. He was considered the king, the maker, the person that made the presidents of the United States. And if you want to be president, you had to go sit behind him because he was the king.
And he was known to also stuff the ballot boxes, right? Which was
that's right.
Also giving credit to how Kennedy was elected by many people.
Yeah, so this is a very interesting place. The Chicago Symphony, which is one of the revolutionary orchestras in this country, that contributed something to music on an evolutionary and revolutionary basis under Stockman. You know, it's all of these people that came from the South there, the inventions that took place in Chicago. It's an extremely rich place, you know, and something that my mother told me about it that was very interesting. Now, when I grew up there, you know, they say Chicago is like racially segregated. Was considered the most segregated place in the United States. And the name for Chicago was like as far down south as you can get up north, if you can understand that.
Yeah.
That's how Chicago was described, as far down south as you can get up north. Now, there was an incident in the book where I talked about going across a borderline that I didn't know existed because I was a kid and got attacked by these white people. They tried to kill me because of I had gone across this line of segregation. Something my mother told me, she said, you know, when I went to school, we were segregated, but there was no segregation in education. She said, you all grew up with segregation in education. In other words, I went to school in a Black community and in the Black areas, right? So in the Black areas, who's in the Black areas? Blacks, Chinese, and Jewish people are all in the ghetto together, right? So they all go to these schools. But my mother, when she showed me her books from high school, I was shocked when I saw what it looked like, you know. She said it was all based on merit. You got into the best schools in Chicago based on merit, not on race. She said, when I came along, all of that changed again in Chicago, that you had to go to school where you live. You went to school based on how smart you were when my mother came. And my mother was at one of the smartest schools there, which was Marshall.
Just a final word on Chicago from listeners. If you ever go, take the tour, the architecture tour by the American Institute of Architects, which is wonderful. Well, shows you what Henry's talking about, how the city was rebuilt after the Chicago fire, and all these amazing buildings were constructed along those lines. So Henry, in your book, you talk about the first time you heard Charlie Parker.
Mm-hmm.
What can you tell us what that was like for you? You were like 15, 16 at that point?
Oh, no, I was much younger than that. I heard Charlie Parker when I was about 7 or 8.
Oh.
And then I was really confused. I loved it, but I was confused. I didn't know what I was listening to. It just, it didn't fit into anything that I understood at the time, you know. I hadn't begun to study music at that time. I was teaching myself how to play, but I hadn't studied any music. But when I heard Charlie Parker and that whole crowd of people that became the so-called modernists, Dizzy Gillespie and Kenny Clark and Thelonious Monk, these people that would change everything in terms of abstract expressionism, in terms of art, and abstract expressionism in terms of music. That's why they would consider these modernists. I just didn't know what to make of this, you know, and it took, by the time I got ready for high school, then I started to understand it a little bit better, but I knew I couldn't do it. that was beyond reach.
And nor did you want to particularly, did you?
Well, I did, because you come into music and you come in and you have to be you're listening to something. You have to emulate something to get in. You just don't get in without emulating something, you know. And so that's what I did. I came in first listening to Charlie Parker and that whole group of the modernists, you know. After years passed, I started going backwards past. I went back to Scott Joplin and Jelly Roll and people like that, you know. I found that Stravinsky got me on that trail, because Stravinsky kept going back, looking at different important composers and trying to reevaluate and reuse the ideas and concepts from earlier periods, you know. But I did the same thing, but with the bebop. I knew that one thing I understood was that, like, you play music in a real world of values, cultural, social ideas, etc. And I knew that this music, I was just a kid, that music wasn't relevant to me. These were people that grew up up under the World War II influences. I was a baby of World War II. You know, so I said, this doesn't represent me. This is not for me. I said, I have to learn it, but this is really not for me to do. You know, I knew that early on. And I just had to wait to find out what was going to be the language or the cultural venue that would really capture me and be representative of people like me and others that grew up during my time, you know.
And that didn't happen until much later.
Right. When I heard Ornette Coleman, that was it.
Ornette Coleman was the guy?
That was it.
When did you hear him? Do you remember that when you first heard him?
Well, in the neighborhood I was living at the time, it was one kid that he was a little bit older and he had a job, part-time job, and used to buy all these records. And we used to go there to his house to listen to records, you know, and he came in and put on this Ornette Coleman record, and a couple of us looked, as soon as it came on, a couple of us looked at each other and said, that's it.
Were you in New York then?
We said, that's it. You know,
New York?
It was like three musicians in this crowd of listeners, and the three of us, as soon as it came, we kind of looked at each other and said, uh-oh, that sounds like it. You know.
Were you living in New York at that time, or what?
Oh, no. I was about 13 years old.
Oh, okay. So still in Chicago then.
I was in Chicago. Yeah, I was about 13 when I heard on that. I said, oh wow. I said, this is really something here. This is a whole new ball game, you know.
But then you had Sonny Rollins.
Oh yeah.
On your sax case, right?
Yeah, that was my main influence. You know, you need back to my earlier statement, you have to have a beacon in life. You can't just jump out here and do something. You got to have some kind of beacon to help guide you, something that you can measure up to, something that will reveal information to you. You don't necessarily, at first, you know, some people make the mistake of trying to emulate and be just like the beacon. You can't be as good as the beacon. Nobody can. We come along during a time, and I find out you can never do something as good as other people did it, and nobody can do anything better than you. That's just the way it is. You can work all you want. You'll never play as good as Charlie Parker. It's not possible. And nobody will be able to play as good as you. Because we're specific in time, you know. We do things given the time that we're living in. But so Sonny Rollins was my hero and stayed my hero in terms of the tenor saxophone. I had heroes in terms of different instruments and different kinds of music. I mean, you know, gospel music, that was a whole nother area, like the blues. You know, I had my different heroes there, you know. But Sonny remained my main person that I could use as a yardstick and a benchmark to go forward and to test myself, you know. See, and the good thing would be like I would always fail. so
well,
there was more work to do. There was a lot of work to do. That's what that meant.
Well, I mean, in your career, you've experimented so much with all these various types of bands that you put together, these groups of instruments that typically won't see in any other band. So I think that's a hallmark of your work. It's the fact that you are open to experimentation. You haven't just sort of rested on your laurels and just continued one band, for example, you know, throughout your career. You've had many different combinations, and I bet you're still thinking about them today, right?
Yeah. You know, because you have like, if we stay in the world of music, we cross over to literature or something else, and we might have to change what I'm saying. You get people that are stylists. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And that's fine, but you have other people that are constantly going forward. I'm one of those people. I can't go backwards. I have to go forward. Going backwards is a mistake for me under all circumstances. In my private life, going backwards is a mistake. It is. I learned that, you know, going back, trying things, say, you should never go back there to see that girl. She didn't like you in the first place. There's always something. Going back to this neighborhood. See, they almost beat you up for going back to that neighborhood. So, all these things, you know, you have to find these things out for yourself. But like I said, there's people that have become great stylists. They stay with a subject or a repertory or a subject way of presenting themselves. Somebody would paint the same picture over and over and over. It'll keep changing, but it'd be up to you to see the minute changes in it. That's a stylist, you know. Me, I keep moving. I understood that about myself early on, that I had to keep moving.
But you know, in putting this book together, you had to look back as well. So you had to, you know, maybe force yourself to think about things that maybe weren't so pleasant, or you know, not something you were that comfortable discussing in public in this way. And leading up to talking about your time in the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. When you know you went overseas, you tell us the story, which is in your book, about how you wound up at the front. Because at first you were just, you know, expecting to be a musician, and then what happened?
Well, I was always a musician. The thing was, when I got drafted, and I went down to the draft board, the guy there knew me, and he called me there and he said, I got good news for you and bad news. And he said, the bad news is you've been drafted. I was drafted because I had taken a job and I was going to school part-time. You're supposed to go to school and have about 16 to 18 hours. You have to be a full-time student to get a 3S deferment is what it was called. To be deferred from the draft, you had to be in school full-time. And I was working part-time, trying to save up enough money so I could go to the American Conservatory of Music. And I got caught. So I got drafted. And so the guy said, the bad news is you've been drafted. The good news is you're a professional musician. So you can get sign a contract with the government to play music only. No, he said to play music. And that was true. As soon as I finished basic training, I went to Fort Riley, Kansas, and I was in one band. Then I went to the top band. Then I was in the top band on that post. And everything was going along fine. And then I got promoted to arranger. There had only been one other man that had this position before me, Daniel Ward from Cleveland, Ohio, that was during World War II, and he was had that position, and he was sent to, in World War II, the Aleutian Islands, and distinguished himself by getting a silver medal. And then he became the drummer on the Johnny Carson show. From there, he went to the symphony and became a great percussionist. And there he switched over to becoming a composer. And then he won the Pulitzer Prize. He won the Pulitzer Prize, and then I won the Pulitzer Prize from the Vietnam War. He won the only soldier to win the Pulitzer Prize in World War II in music with Daniel Ward, and then I won it from the Vietnam War. I got, I'm gonna skip to confuse I was writing music, and like, the music was premiered in Kansas City, and when the Archbishop didn't like the music that was up on the platform, and he jumped up and said, who's responsible for this blasphemy? And that sent me on the road.
But you were taking liberties with some American.
I wasn't taking liberties. Well, he might have thought I was taking liberties, but what did he know? But he didn't know anything about music, you know. I wasn't taking, the band loved it. He just didn't know anything about music. I mean, you know, people are just get over in your business, and I make wristwatches and you build boats. What are you doing over here telling me how to make a wristwatch? You know what I'm saying? You cooking artichokes and you over here digging ditches. Now the ditch dig is telling you how to fix some artichokes. You know, well, that was what he was doing. And so consequently, he got them to punish me for this by sending me to Vietnam in one day. They did this in one day, in less than 24 hours. This was the Archbishop of the Kansas City, of Kansas, the state of Kansas, and that whole area, and those generals almost had a heart attack when he jumped up and said who's responsible for this blasphemy. So they knew they had to do something to me. So what they did, they sent me to Vietnam. And so back to the contract, to the agreement. All right. So I had an agreement with the government, just like the doctors and the other people that had contracts with the government, you know, the surgeons, the cooks, the different people, professional cooks, tailors that came in that had been successful, that had businesses, that tailors, they got contracts. So the thing was, we found out was, it didn't say that I couldn't have a second occupation. See, so yes, you're a musician, but now you're in the infantry too.
So then it followed with some, your book goes on to describe like some, you know, we're laughing now, right? But there were so many instances there that were not very laughable, that were very dangerous and
well, I had some funny incidents with it anyway. On the way to before I left, when I was still in basic training, this is not in the book. This was a little short story. So like, because of my build, I'm long and got long muscles and thin, and so like, you go to basic training, they build you up. You're nothing but muscles, but they're all long muscles. So like, they had targeted me. These officers had targeted me to try to to be a paratrooper because of my build and everything. So they start courting me, right? Letting me out of certain duties and giving me a lot of all the dessert I could eat. When she started giving me a lot of ice cream, I'd agree to anything, So they came and got me one evening to take me out to put on a big show. This was unauthorized. They had taken me out to this field at sundown, and the plane was coming over. And so it was just me out there and these officers, and they were looking at me, and the plane came over, and it was going to be a demonstration of a paratrooper. So guess what happened? The guy jumped out of the plane, and the chute didn't open. He came all the way to the ground. Boom!
Oh, man. Poor guy.
They looked at me. I didn't break no expression on my face. But I said, just think, I know they don't think I'm going to do this, So they were very upset. So then they act like it was my fault. So they started screaming at me about, why this man chute didn't open? Because he didn't follow instructions. He probably got somebody else to fold his chute. I didn't open my mouth. I knew better to say anything. So they said, we'll try it again. The next plane comes over. The next guy jumps out. And there's the chute opened, but the jumper ended up on top of the chute. That's what they call a Mae West, right? Okay. So they looked at me again, and I looked at there and said, a Mae West, huh? I said, so because now they had put this up, now this guy died, you got to remember the guy that jumped out of the plane, so there was real trouble about this because it was an unauthorized staging of this to recruit me. So they were in big trouble. So as a result of that, they stayed mad at me, and then they called me out and charged me with something so I was on KP for the rest of the time I was in the basic training. I was had to go to KP every night, peeling potatoes and washing dishes in ovens up to the time that I left there,
We're getting a little bit late here on the time. So I'm just going to jump forward a little bit to make sure, because I want to, there's so much more to discuss, and I definitely recommend this book highly for more Henry stories, many, many of them. But I want to talk about the other one, your most recent work that combines a lot of your interests in art, music, film. You were able to put together from a live event, which I was there and lucky enough to listen and be a part of. Mm-hmm. And you took that, you shot it. It was all built around a COVID time. Mm-hmm. Tell me how that whole start, the process by which you arrived at your the film, because did you start in the beginning? Did you know you were going to make a film? Because you also made original artwork. If we could show some of these slides now that accompanied the film and the live events. Like, for example, start talking about the, how you came upon doing this project.
Well, like this aspect of it, the photographic aspect of it was, like you said, we were all basically confined to our homes during COVID, and we didn't have any masks, we didn't have anything at the time. And so I would just come out, you had to come out and walk and get some air every day and exercise a little bit. And so we live in the East Village, I live in the East Village, and I would walk just in the East Village, which is 5th Avenue to the Avenue D, from Houston to 14th Street, that's the East Village. And I started noticing all of these things that were being left in the streets that it didn't make sense. I mean, really beautiful items and expensive things that were being left in the street. And I started photographing them. I just started photographing them, and I didn't really know why for a while. And then I understood why these things were just in the street and not being picked up. That's because there was no homeless people in the street. And most people didn't notice that. They put all of those homeless people in hotels because they couldn't go to the shelters because the shelters were a petri dish. See, and they would have came out of that and picked up a lot of these things that were in the street. So I was shooting all of these things because I've always had an interest in photography. But my interest not as a photographer was just to document what was being put in the street, because all these people were leaving, not just New York, East Village, but they were leaving New York. So they were abandoning all these wonderful things and putting them in the street, you know. And there was more, I've never seen so many moving trucks in my life. I only show so many of these. I have over 200 moving vans.
Oh, wow.
Moving vans alone. Only taken from the East Village, only from the East Village, you know. So that part of the photographic part, and then I would come home and after these walks, and I would start writing, kind of automatic writing in a way, type of haiku automatic writing, you know. And that's something I've been doing all of my life also. I've been writing that way, you know. And I just started collecting, you know, collecting the writings, collecting the photographs. And then I gave the writings to my daughter to paint the writings so that I had 42 paintings now. And I had already made a film at the Tilton Gallery and one at the Augustine Loring Gallery a few years back. And that I had been trying to figure out how I wanted to use that film. I had it in its original form, which is about a half an hour film. And so I started going back into it, exploring how I could use it in this piece in a multimedia fashion, you know. So this is some of the writing. 19 will suffice for a bear market. Forget 20, not supposed to be a panic. Pianissimo. This is not a quiz. The picture, frame, seeing everything, nothing, no puzzle, just stuff, peeling from the bazaar.
And did you already have this idea of putting all these things together into one piece yet?
No, that came together as I collected, as the material was building up, it started coming to me. And then I started writing music.
Okay, so the music came after.
Yeah, I started writing music. I was taking pictures and writing prose poetry. And then I started going back, going into that film that I had made, taking that film apart, seeing how I could use it in this piece, you know. But it was all due to COVID.
Well, you're making the best of a bad situation. Yeah. Which, you know, just, I don't really want to go back to the Vietnam War, but just, I know you in your book, and I've heard you say this as well, that the Vietnam War, after that, you felt like you had become an artist, that you take that experience, which, you know, had good and bad, and, you know, people will have to read the book to find out more about that. But, you know, maybe that's one of your trademarks, is the ability to do that, to take something and turn it into something beautiful, a piece of art out of your experience. Though it's obviously not about COVID, is it? Is this a piece about COVID, would you say?
No, well, COVID is a part of it. COVID, if you talk about COVID as a disease, but COVID as it affects our behavior and what we do socially and what how our cultural ideas have been enhanced and affected by COVID. Not COVID itself, but how it has impacted our lives. You know, what has it all of a sudden people are afraid of one another. They say, don't get up in my face, you could give me something. People are running, leaving out of town. All these things, you know, you get all these buildings all of a sudden that's being shut down because of businesses are working from home. So now you got a big ghost town. Midtown had become a ghost town at that time. If you to go up to Midtown, it was incredible the amount of square footage that was not now empty. I used to go up there and just look at that. I said, this is really amazing, you know. And the rat population. The rat population was out of control, you know. And the way it has shifted from one side, when people, if you live on a block, let's say it's 100 people on one side of the street and 100 people on the other side of the street. Let's say there's 100 rats on both sides, 100 rats on your side of the street and 100 rats on the other side of the street. If 50 people leave from the other side of the street, those rats are smart enough to know there's not going to be enough food there for them, so they come to your side of the street. Now you got a rat problem. That's what happened during COVID. All of a sudden, they were putting rat traps everywhere. That's something else I got a whole slew of pictures of, David. I take a whole collection of rat traps that in New York.
Wait for that exhibit, Henry.
Everywhere, rat traps everywhere. Yeah.
You said, you quoted, I think it was James Blood Ulmer telling you what Ornette Coleman had said to him, jazz is the teacher, blues is the preacher, and you added, time is the reaper, you can't prevent change. So, right. You know, so now, you know, time is the reaper for all of us. What is coming up for you? Are you still, you're looking ahead, you have new projects in the works, constantly composing, God knows what? Tell me.
Yeah, well, I'm finishing up the other one because we're putting that now into all of the different documentary film festivals in the United States and England and English-speaking countries, you know, Canada. That's what we're doing right now. And then I'm writing new music for a 15-piece ensemble that I have to get finished and working on the next installation piece. This is an 8.5-minute installation piece involving photography, film, and music. And so I'm going into starting the studio to put this together and make it an installation piece.
That's so great, because I feel, you know, your music that you're composing now, or, you know, that I've been hearing is, I think fits in well with what you're doing now with this multimedia, because I feel like your music takes in things from all over the place and somehow, you know, puts it together so it seems unified, not abstract in that sense. So, you know, I feel like this assemblage, collage, multimedia is very much, you know, represents who you are as an artist to me.
Oh, thank you.
So I think we've reached our hour now.
Yes, thank you so much, David and Henry. This has been an incredible dialogue. I cannot wait to read more. It's been so fun. Thank you so much. Thank you. We've got some great questions from the audience today. And our first question will be coming from Lois. And Lois, you should be able to unmute and ask your question directly.
Hi, Henry.
Hi,
I don't know
Ben.
if you remember me, Lois from the New Eurekan.
Yep.
Yeah, hi. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how you became engaged with the Black Arts Movement, Steve Cannon and David Henderson and Amiri Baraka and all those people. And also the Poets Choir.
Oh, well, the Poets Choir, that was Butch Morris.
Oh, that was Butch, right.
Butch Morris was really responsible for that. And then Bob, you know, Holman, who's here, I see, you know, had projects over there. I got involved with the, back in Chicago, I was involved with the different artistic movements, Black arts movements, and not just Black arts movement. I was involved in all kinds of Japanese movements and just all kinds of people that were doing different things. I've always been into the different aspects of the arts. So when I got to New York, I just continued that. That's how I met David Henderson, David Hammonds, and Steve Cannon, you know, because that's always been my interest, you know, music, film, theater, dance, you know. It's always been the thing that's attracted me. You know.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay.
Thank you so much for that question, Lois. Our next question will be from Charlie.
Thanks so much for this amazing conversation. It's just been such a treat to listen to. Henry, one thing that I was curious as you were talking about listening to Charlie Parker as a young musician and is your history as a composer. I was curious, did you start composing music also when you were such a young musician, or did that come later? And if so, I'm curious if there's been any significant shifts in the way that you set about the composition effort. Excuse me.
Yeah.
I'll leave it there. Thank you, Henry.
Well, when I first started, what I discovered when I was teaching myself how to play boogie woogie, what I discovered was I wasn't really interested, that my interest really wasn't about playing, but I wanted to understand how was this made? That's what I understood right away. That's how my interest got so wide. That's why I had so much on my plate, because I wasn't just trying to play an instrument. I was trying to understand how music was made. So by the time I became a senior in high school, I wrote my first piece of music. And by the time I got to junior college, I had written the first major piece for concert band. And I'd written a whole string of small ensemble pieces by that point. So, that part of your question is about my processes changing. Is that what you? Yeah. Well, yeah, it's constantly changes because it's a developmental thing. You work in a medium and you do everything you can, and then there's nothing else to do. So you have to move on. Hopefully, you can find something else to do. You know, composing is it can be, a person can work one minefield for their entire life, and others you have to go from minefield to minefield. I've had to change minefields.
Thank you so much, Charlie, for that amazing question. Thanks, Henry. Our final question today will be from Fong. Over to you, Fong.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Henry. Thank you.
Thank you, Fong.
Congratulations on amazing memoir. I'm halfway through. I have to find more time to finish it, but it has been a pleasurable reading. Terrific life story, Henry. Follow the question with Charlie, and hearing you talking about growing up in Chicago, I wonder also the John and Alan Lomax field recording. Did you come in contact with them? Because, you know, field recording was so essential for the Library of Congress and what they do, not just for folk music, but also present music. I mean, they discovered Led Belly, for example, you know, in the early 30s, the same time they discovered Jerome Morton that you mentioned. Yep. Also, there's blues, you know, there's Delta blues like Sun House, you mentioned Muddy Water, of course, then was McKinney Morganfield. He hasn't changed his name quite yet. That's only came later in 50 when it. So I was wondering, that's one question. Did you come in contact and well aware of the
I never met Alan. It would have been Alan Lomax. I remember seeing him, but I never met him.
Yeah. Okay. But were you exposed to that?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, good.
There were other people too that were documented. The field recording, Bob Kester from Delmar Records.
Yeah.
Delmar Records, which recorded the first AACM music. That's what they were. They were field recorders. They went to the South. I don't think he did any Appalachian recordings though. But I think Alan Lomax might have did some Appalachian recordings.
Okay.
But that's all. I didn't know much about him. I had seen him once in connection with where I'm going to see Malcolm X speech.
Yeah.
There, recording Malcolm, I think,
Yeah.
But I didn't know much about him, other than at the time, that he did all these field recordings, There was a number of people interested, but I think none such records came along later. They were interested in the same thing in film recordings initially,
Yeah.
America discovered that they didn't know much about their own folk history.
Right. Well, I mean, it's so interesting what they did because, they were archiving, recording both black and white music tradition. It was not separated, it's all together, which brought me to remember, I used to collect records in college before coming to New York, and that was the end of it. But I remember having one album, and I think Raymond is here, can correct me if I'm wrong, Raymond, but I think it was recorded in 1962 by Victoria Spivey, used to have her own record label. And she did this record for Big Joe Williams, which introduced Bob Dylan as a harmonica player and backup vocal. So what's my question? My question is that because of the Lomax brother, what they did, was there a sense when you were at all cross-pollinate with folk music, like Dylan and other people?
Not really. Everything was actually becoming, in the 60s, everything was starting to get segregated.
Yeah. Okay.
So-called integration produced segregation on a certain level,
Yeah.
And, one thing too, what most people don't understand about the 1960s and the Integration Act, the myth, and I say the big misconception that integration has something to do with Black people is a myth.
Yeah.
It's a total myth. It had the smallest thing to do with Black people. What it had to do with was they were trying to get the money of every ethnic group in America. Every group in America was segregated. That's what people don't understand. The Polish people, the Italians, every group of people had their own unions, and they had a lot of property and money. And the big people wanted that money and property. So with integration, that means that everybody had to come into the big unions sitting here in New York City and give up all of their riches and their property goods.
Yeah.
And the one group of people that fought them for years was the Polish people in Chicago. They fought the federal government for years. When you used to come from the airport in Chicago, there was a white marble building with a gold statue of Paderewski standing on top of it. That's how much money the Polish people was just physically showing you how much money they had. It wasn't giving it up,
Yeah.
The Black musicians had a major fight to join up with the federal, with the national unions, because they owned so much. They had so much property, they had so much money.
Yeah.
They had property at the University of Chicago that they owned, real estate. And there was a major fight. These fights went on in St. Louis, Baltimore, Detroit, all over America, where you had the tailors unions, plumbing unions, all of these different groups, waiters, cooks, all of these are unions, ethnic groups. And they made the whole civil rights movement and integration dumped the whole thing on the back of Black people. And that's what not, it wasn't even about that. It was getting the money. That was a little piece of the pie.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, my last question, because, you know, you came to New York and became immersed and naturally integrated into the experiment culture, the Bohemian culture, which most of us came to New York. And by the time I came to New York in the late 80s, it was fleeting. It was leaving us slowly. Very few people would agree to resist the temptation to become professor in the academy, Henry, you know. So my point is that as I'm involved with so many things, and one of the things that I was trying to convey why we have to cultivate experiment culture. And I know that you have a certain, you know, not disdain, but you don't particularly care much for institutionalized jazz pedagogy. So how do we cultivate and support, and given the certain kind of, you know, fearlessness to experiment among young musicians? You know, it's not just like yourself. You love art, you make art, and you compose, you play music, you do so many different things, Henry. So how do we can together support the next generation, you know?
Mm-hmm. Well, you see, like you said, I'm not a big fan of the pedagogy of the university, but I'm not willing to throw the whole thing out because that's all we got right now. Unfortunately, that they don't seem to have the right vision to teach young people what they really should know. See, now we don't even have basically a liberal arts program in America.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you walk into a music class, and somebody says, "Well, have you read Shakespeare?" And they look at each other like you're crazy. Who is he?
Mm-hmm.
You know, why should I know something about Shakespeare? You know,
right?
With this photographer or that painter, you know. So I remember going to a class and I brought up Cecil Taylor's name and Stravinsky's name, and the kids looked at me like I was a dinosaur. They didn't know who. And one kid said, "I think I heard of him."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of work to do. See, the problem is the institutions have lost their focus. Their focus is on money. They're too busy focusing making money. They've forgotten about the curriculum and the future of America. We have they're turning out all these students that cannot compete with other students from around the world. Now we're looking pretty silly in terms of even mathematics in grammar school and what mathematical scores look like in this country.
Right.
And giving kids the right to determine what their courses are going, what they want to do. So here's the baby crawling on the floor, and the baby's going to tell you what you, the parents, should be doing for them.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Right. So will the baby ever learn how to walk? If you the guiding parent, don't be there to make sure that happens, or you're gonna listen to what the baby has to say.
Right.
So like that's where we're faced with education. Just focus on money and letting students have all of this freedom. You don't need all this freedom. You don't learn anything by having all this freedom. You learn things because you're restricted. That's how you learn things, because of restrictions. That's exactly how you learn things, through restrictions.
Yeah, yeah.
But nobody, we don't have a czar, an educational czar to represent this viewpoint. Because like I said, the out of control price of going to college now, these that seems to be the agenda of the colleges. And like I said, I've said this before, if you pick up their curriculum booklet and go back and pick it up, go back and find the one from 35, 40 years ago and tell me if you see any difference in it. None. You ever learned anything in 35 and 40 years to teach people? There's something wrong there. If we go to science, science will tell us that there's been all kinds of advancements in everything, you know. The musical sciences and all other kind of sciences will tell us that there's been advances that we should have made use of. But you know, we're just sitting there, and like I said, we don't have any alternative right now. We have to keep these institutions. I don't know. I don't have an answer for this other than like the young artists that come to see me, which is very few. That I share with them my ideas about how art works and what they should know. You're supposed to know everything about the past. I didn't have money what a lot of kids have today, but when I know it's almost time to go. When I got out the service and I went back I had enough, I saved some money and I had the GI Bill and I went back to continue my education, right? Well, I didn't go to school to get a degree.
Yeah.
I went to school to get every piece of information that I went to school to take every class that they had, every class. That's what I wanted to take.
Yeah.
I kept taking classes until they put me out. They threatened to put me out, so I would change curriculums. I kept changing curriculums. And then they made me take a bachelor's degree. Then they made me take a master's degree. And I was about ready to get a doctorate degree. And I'm not interested in any of those degrees. I'm interested in the information.
Yeah.
And by the time they gave me 1 or 2 degrees, I said, well, I still don't have the information I need, so forget it. So anyway, I discovered a great teacher who taught me that, Henry, you have to become the teacher.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning of my really best education when I started coming to my own class.
Oh yeah, that's super true, Henry. Well, I always love what Charlie Parker said before someone asked him, I think New York Times, can you define jazz in one sentence? He said, it's very easy, man. If you don't live it, it won't come out your horn.
Right.
So I think experience what counts. So you certainly have that rich experience. So I can't wait to finish the book, Henry. So congratulations again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, David, for being the gracious, terrific host.
Good to see everybody, Bob.
Yes, Bob, without the question, but we'll get back to Eleanor. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Fong. That was so wonderful.
Thank you, David.
We do have one more question that came from Raymond Foy. So Raymond, if you want to ask quickly, I think we have time for one last one before poetry.
Thank you. Mr. Threadgill, you have this incredible arc of experience that very few people have today. You mentioned Malcolm X, you mentioned the Black Arts Movement. Given what you've seen through civil rights in the 60s and the radical movements, and then where we've come to today, what are the gains? What are the losses? What is the way going forward in terms of the struggle for racial equality?
The struggle for racial equality, in my opinion, in the United States is a struggle that started in the Civil War. And this country had a chance to go forward and correct that, and they didn't. They won the war and they allowed the South to continue with their philosophies, their symbols, their behavior, and with their weapons. It was the first time in history that any losing army had retreated home with their weapons and their symbols. Germany, they did not allow the Nazi flag to fly again or the Nazi movement to perpetuate itself. The czars, the revolution in Russia, they didn't allow this. We made a serious mistake. Philosophically, you've got two groups of people in this country. When you go back to what happened at the beginning of the Civil War in America. You have to think about this so that you can appreciate, understand when I say there's two groups of people. When the South decided to secede, they came to the Union, remember? And what did the Union say? We're not for this, but we can't stop you, so we'll have to let you do it, right? That's what they said. So what happened? What happened then? Anybody here know what happened? What happened was Fort Sumter. Remember Fort Sumter? When the South started the war by shooting, because they said, we just don't want to separate, we want to fight. So they wanted to beat up the North and take over the North and have its own philosophy prevail over the entire country. Well, this country made a mistake when they started this killing and insisted on keeping up their certain ideas. They were supposed to never let this happen again. So now it's come back on us. And who knows how long this is going to continue. You see what happened when people tried to overthrow the government, when they ran into the Congress in different places. People need to get used to this. This is not going away because we didn't stand up to it in the first place. If you don't stop it, it's going to continue. And basically, the only solution from my view is to have a North and South Korea, or North and South Vietnam, or North and South something. I don't see these two groups of people ever living together. I don't see how that's possible. It doesn't make any sense. We have a group basically that can be defined as intolerant, and another group that I would describe as tolerant, and they don't mix.
Thank you so much, Henry, and thanks, Raymond, for that final question. It's been, again, such an incredible conversation. I'm so grateful to you, Henry and David, for being here on the NSE today. We do have a tradition here at the Rail of concluding our community events with a poetry reading. And today I'm excited to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Julie Patton, to the stage. Julie Patton is a New York City-based poet and visual artist. She's also the founder of the Eco Arts Housing and Land Conservation Project based near Detroit. Patton is the author of... Okay, I'll skip this part. Should I just pass it right over to you, Julie?
That is not to be cruel and interrupt you. I thank you for your introduction. I just don't like to hear about myself when myself is not here, not really there, because nothing's really here nor there. So I intended to just walk through some words. However, I have been having trouble this air quality. And so I won't be able to do what takes a lot of breath. There are many things that were triggered, including this squeaky chair. And one was what blue tubes look like, smashed and bloody, and you beat the slop out of them, then pour over can cakes. Cadmium, cobalt's toxic too, could serve blue rice. Wonder what is in this too cool aid. And dye your clothes with it and die too. Instead of painting, running around with blue nicks. care a mood to go in blue dump the paint, can still streak down the porcelain sink and the neighbors as the. Here come that Mexican man, here come that Mexican man. Oh, ain't that the roof? Oh, fast as lightning. Next thing you know, it was in the house with its blue jay head. In front of the TV with the stupid blue pit news. I don't see how anyone can concentrate on that like that. You didn't, you did, you ain't, you apostrophed used to be distracted by why you can't catch a lot of colors like that. You just enter your pain. Enter your pain with blue glass. Now you see how things can be. I can lick a lot. Hey, I have an idea. How come there's no series of blue paints? After the blues could make money off of it. Forget Windsor. Should be Muddy Waters blue. No, James Brown blue. Serious so Billy Tab Collar blue. Don't take my words, please. Nude indigo, Afro bluesiac, hesitation blues. How could you forget Duke Ellington blues? Rhapsody in blue. Porgy and Bess blue. Al Green blue. No, Stain gets blue. I'm sure there is more. Coltrane blue would be deep. No, the loneliest blue. What kind of blue would that be bop bop and beat and bop at the bottom of your beat repeat. Maybe will be, shall be, still be what you been making some buckets, scatting a freaking smear can, paint blue, line watercolor, middle muddle. That should be the name of the entire line. Let's make some little teeny scatting American freaking blue line. Oh, Demi Scott blues. Forget hype. The blues. Speaking of watercolor, this blue seems true enough. Typical blue, a typical blue, a true-ish blue. You always say that, true. Ishy-wishy. What's so true about it? Like a true voice. But I know which blue I'm referring to, and that's different for water. Water, which tends to take on the color of the sky. You know what? I'm looking at the sky right now, and a part of it's almost a Wedgwood blue. Oh, now it's getting darker. Grayer. No, it's quite orange. Quite orange. The complementary color of a sky with a zillion hues. But I ain't never seen a sky yet like the one I've seen in San Francisco. The clouds, cloud. Did you know that? The clouds cloud. Real loud, silk like as if there's a layer, air packet or in pocket that forms underneath the clouds. Because the bottom all seems to be on the same. And then they swim in the sky, in the language of the color. No, violet or violence, or blurple. Well, blur me down. The dew on both your houses. What about Crayola? Pride on people sounds like the bluest eye. Someone's daughter. Yes, the cry on people had blue, 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 a blookie's in the room. 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 Now don't forget the war paint. Greenbacks, camouflage, flag, blue. Maybe you better think about this again. You with your blue mouth. Cut out the host talking about blah, blah, blah. Blah, 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 blah. Blah, 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 blah. Is that how you started? With the letter L, licking the surface of blue underpants. Did you know A forgot its pants? So let's talk about another way of articulating these things.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, Julie, thank you so much. That was amazing.
That was an asthma attack. Really. Seriously. That's why I had to fly you out. Thank you. Henry, this is your 9th Street neighbor.
This is who?
Your 9th Street neighbor. Normally I'd run into you back in the day in commodities, or I remember when I was going on the road with Don Byron, you gave me the best advice ever, because you told me to travel very light. No, I said I was interested in traveling light because I'm a minimalist. And do you remember what you said to me? You said Jersey. And you suggested I get knit, things that I could wash out in cold water at night, and then just hang it to dry, and be ready to go in the morning. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. That was amazing. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you so much again, David and Henry. It's been so amazing. A really great way to end the week. Thanks everyone for tuning in. And we would also, of course, like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art for sponsoring our NSE program. They make these daily conversations possible and support our archive, which is on the Royals YouTube channel. And this conversation will be posted there very soon. For the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has been a platform for arts, culture, and politics in our free monthly publication and these public events like our NSE. Check the chat for a link to support the Rail to donate. And join us on Monday. We are going to be offering a screening of Nam June Pak's Moon is the Oldest TV. It's going to be an amazing film, and you can register via the link on our website. The link is in the chat. Again, thank you, Henry, David, and Julie.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you all.
Lovely long weekends.
Okay.
See you.
Thank you. Thank
Good
you.
seeing everybody.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Henry. Thanks, David.
Thank you
So much.
Thank you, Henry.
Conversation today.
David.
Really wonderful.
That was incredible.
It's
Thank you,
wonderful, huh?
Julie.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great audience.
So much.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
See
Henry.
you, Raymond.
Thank
you.
you. Congratulations.
Nice.
You're so awesome.
Thank you so much, Julie. Great meeting.
We're saying goodbye. We're saying goodbye on the NSE.
Amazing work. So
Eat
beautiful.
out, everybody.
Yes. And go get Henry's book.
Thank you, Henry.
I don't want to go. I'm having too
Thank
much
you,
fun.
Julie. Great meeting. Thank you, David.
Yeah, see you, Henry.
Thank you, Henry.